Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Simple Living High Thinking, where we unpack Tukram Prabhu's Bhagavad Gita class from every Friday evening. And I'm joined again by Varangi Radha Devi Dasi. She's back. And Tadeo Souza. And we are at the beginning of chapter 4, where Krishna is starting to reveal himself as God. So what kind of context do you feel the listener needs? Maybe this is the first podcast they're tuning into.
Essentially, it's chapter 4, and starting on chapter 2 is where the teachings of the Gita really start. Chapter 1 is really an introduction to what's happening in terms of the war and the people present on the war that's happening, which is where Bhagavad Gita was spoken. Chapter 2, in a very great summary, we've been summarizing the chapters as we are going along, so I'll do a very high-level summary now to fulfill your request, Kim. So chapter 2, essentially, there are two main lessons. One is that we are not the body, which is matter, but we are the spirit soul, which is spirit. So the first teaching is the difference between matter and spirit. And we are spirit and not matter. So we are not the body. And chapter 3, well, let me go back. And then with that understanding, we now should act in the world by doing our duty, but not be attached to the results. So once you understand you're not the body, but the spirit soul, you would therefore act in a way in the world where you're performing your duty, but not attached to the results. Then chapter 3, Arjuna is a little bit bewildered still about the dilemma he's having. And he asks Krishna, hey, you're being equivocal. Can you explain to me perfectly fine now? Is it better for me to be more contemplative and perhaps be like non-violence and go to a place where it's more secluded, where I can meditate in seclusion? Or do I really engage myself in this war that is about to happen? And Krishna had already explained the difference between the two very perfectly clear, which showed that Arjuna was still bewildered in his understanding. Krishna, being a great teacher, recognizes that and speaks chapter 3, which is essentially a step back by focusing on the fact that, okay, do your duty. You know, that there is something that is greater than you in the universe. Do your duty, don't be attached to the results, and be aware that this greater aspect of reality does exist in one way in which you could be in the world and aware of something greater is the fact that, you know, we all have to eat and our food grows, but how does that process takes place? Well, it's dependent on rains, where did the rain come from? And then all of our food grows and then we eat. And this rain, according to Krishna, is provided by demigods, this greater aspect of reality. So Krishna then said, okay, take a step back, know that you're a part of something much greater and do your duty in the world and don't be attached to the results. And by recognizing that you are a small part of something much greater, little by little, this much greater aspect of reality will become predominant rather than in the background. So that was essentially, in a really bird's eye view, the summary of chapter 3. And then now chapter 4, which is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. It seems to me that what Krishna is doing is reinforcing the teachings of chapter 2 and 3 by saying, hey, you know, this is not anything new that I'm telling you. This has been around for a long time. I've even spoke this knowledge to the sun god, which would have been a demigod that definitely was around before Krishna. And Arjuna and Krishna are around the same age. And by before Krishna, I'm talking about millions of years. So the sun god would have been on the universe, presence on the universe already for over 1,000,000 years. And Krishna is saying, hey, you know, all these teachings that we just covered and summarized high level, chapter 2 and 3, you know, I taught this to the sun god. And to bonify, to make Arjuna know that, hey, I'm not just coming up with these ideas, these teachings, this knowledge, this wisdom has been around for a really long time. And I taught it to the sun god a long time ago, which then that bewilders Arjuna again. Arjuna is having a really rough time, right? He becomes bewildered again by saying, oh, but wait a minute, if you and I are around the same age, because Krishna and Arjuna are cousins in this story, then how is it possible that you spoke this knowledge to the sun god, which is senior to you by birth? And then, like we were discussing in chapter 4, entitled Transcendental Knowledge, is the first time that Krishna starts to really powerfully reveal himself as God. And he does that by answering this question of Arjuna, how can you spoke this knowledge to the sun god if he's older than both of us? And then Krishna starts by saying that, hey, you know, many births you and I have both taken. I can remember them all, but you cannot. So, and that essentially takes us here to chapter 4. So, Varangi, anything you want to add to that?
Excellent. Nothing. That was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the context. That's what leads us to chapter 4. And then so this is the second class on chapter 4. And we covered text. We covered up to text 5 in the first class. And in the second class, we started again on text 5, which reads, the personality of God had said, many, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot. So, and then we start the second class on chapter 4 on this text.
Thank you, Tadeo. That was a great summary and good context of where we are. And I loved how Tukram Prabhu introduced last night's class, where he was talking about how some texts of the Gita, you can read them and apply them to your life just as you go throughout your day. And then other texts are a little more abstract. And he was talking about how God is mostly abstract for a lot of us in this country, at least, where we don't think about him too much, and talking about how to move from an atheist point of view into a theistic point of view. And I just thought it was such a nice intro. What did you guys think?
I agree. I really, I enjoy all his introductions because it really, he either comes in with a problematizing something and like making it really difficult for anybody to think, oh, how is Krishna going to get out of this? Or how are we going to resolve this? Or how am I supposed to think about this? And it really puts, at least me, it challenges me to really know and think about what I think and own it, and then be able to answer. But then when he gives the answer, it's one of those things that, because you've already gone through that mental process and that logical process and the problematizing of that one issue, it's really hard to forget the answer. And so it really helps solidify all the lessons that he teaches during that class. And so specifically about this one class, I really appreciated the fact that he called us out. And by saying us, is like most of us in the world. He did mention some cultures and maybe some smaller parts of different traditions don't have the same relationship with God. But I definitely would fit into that bigger, generalized group that he was pointing at, which is we think of God as an abstract concept. And even when we've already learned a little bit more about God and like we like the idea and then like we're warming up to that relationship, it takes more of an effort to include God as a person in your life, as somebody that actually has a say and has a personality and has likes and dislikes and a character and can actually come into your life and transform it. But it's really up to us to open up that door. and to cultivate that. Because although God exists, whether we believe in it, in him or not, the relationship is not, it's not there by default. I mean, it's always there because we're spiritual beings and therefore we're always connected to our source. But in terms of a practical and natural and a daily relationship, it's not there until we choose to nurture it. And I thought that was really, it was a hard reality to admit, at least in my life. It's like, oh yeah, the times where I feel disconnected is because I haven't chosen to water that relationship, to nurture it. And it actually takes a daily effort, even when you don't want to, you know? I guess I'll share this, but like this morning, I'm just, it's just one of those days. I don't know if it's because I'm in a woman's body, I don't know, hormones. I'm just feeling really heavy and just sluggish, and, you know, but I have a spiritual, I guess, practice with a form of Krishna in my house, to help me remember that Krishna is a person. And so I have this little practice that I do every morning. And, you know, it was really hard. It was like, I really like, I have so many things to do. But it's one of those things that when you have a practice and you have some type of commitment, even if it's a little one, you do it even if you don't feel like it. You do it even if you don't like want to. And I think that's really just what Krishna is telling Arjuna, that's how we can start developing this consciousness, is by regulation and by even just becoming aware that God is a person. And so I know that there's much more to this one little piece of God is a person, but I really appreciated Tikram just putting that spotlight on the fact that he is abstract until we start developing this practice, and Krishna, or God, in whatever name you know him by, starts becoming more of a family member, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like a part of your consciousness and your life and your feelings and your interactions daily. So that was powerful. I definitely felt shaken by that, by him highlighting that aspect of how we're used to thinking of God in the West, or at least in our day-to-day life here in the United States.
Yeah, something else that came up in class that really inspired me was how Tukaram mentioned there are a lot of people that they come across as people who are really into religion. So let's say Christianity, and they talk about Jesus all the time. Jesus is like their cousin or their brother, and they're constantly talking about religion. They almost come across as religious fanatics, right? So there are a lot of people like that. And I guess I'm just making that point. I just want to substantiate that. I have personally met people like this, where they are talking about Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and so on. And on the surface, on the outside, it's quite honorable. It's beautiful. It seems as if they have this deep connection with Lord Jesus Christ, and therefore God, which is an honorable position to be. We believe it is the ultimate goal of the human form of life, is to know God and love God. And then you encounter such people talking about Jesus in such a profound way. And I am almost moved by that. It's beautiful. However, you start talking to them a little bit more. You start asking questions. Is Jesus God, or is he the Son of God? Does an eternal hell exist? If God is so powerful, why can he take the sufferings of the world away? When you start asking those questions that we really shouldn't have an answer to, we then realize that such people, they break down. Their theology / philosophy doesn't really address these points in a satisfying manner. So the point here is to say that we, Krishna consciousness people, are also trying to remember God at all times and never forget God at any time. And therefore, there would be this communality, something that we have in common with the first type of people that I mentioned, right? And it is not just about Christians and Jesus. It could be Muslims and Jews talking profoundly, talking a lot about their religion. But then when you start poking and asking questions, you see that their structure actually collapse. And then there's people with Eastern approach to God understanding, loving God, let's say where we fall in. And on the surface, it seems like we're doing the same thing. We're walking around talking about Krishna and chanting Krishna's name and doing Harinam on the streets, which is like public chanting out loud, beating on drums and so on. And even in this podcast right now, here we are talking about God, right? And like Varangi mentioned, with your extended family and family members and so on. And I find myself oftentimes going back to the topic of Krishna. So what I liked was that Tukaram highlighted. There is a big difference here, however, between people like us. We are not the only ones. We are not unique in the sense. There are many other traditions where they truly know their philosophy and their theology, and they truly know and love God as well. But obviously, I'm putting ourselves in this bucket of people that actually knows and can really answer these questions and are eager to represent the teachings of our gurus, the teachings of our tradition. And we do so shamelessly. And what I mean by that is that in the past, being more theological and philosophically inclined, I wanted to talk about Christianity, but I was a bit embarrassed because there were philosophical problems that I myself didn't feel comfortable with. And when people would ask me about that, I would have to expose that my belief was actually blind and not really cohesive, not complete, not philosophical, not theological, full of contradictions. And therefore, I felt myself a little bit shameful of talking about my religion. But now, with this wealth of information and knowledge and wisdom that our tradition carries, I'm like so happy to talk about. I'm excited. I don't have any shame. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's sit here. Let's talk about theology. Not to brag, not to state that we are in a higher position, that our understanding is better than others, but just eager that I am getting to know God more and more. And to know him is to love him. It will come up in this text that we're going to study here today.
And like you're actually excited to get questions also from people, right? As opposed to like being afraid. It's like, oh, I hope nobody asks you something.
Like, I'm sad when they don't ask questions. Right? It's like, ask me, like ask anybody in my tradition, because we will tell you and it will change your life like it changed ours. And you can experience that scientifically. So I want it, right? Mm-hmm. So I really liked that Tukaram brought that up. And he even made me come up with an acronym. Are you guys ready?
Oh, wow.
My acronym is MERGA.
MERGA?
MRGA. So currently we have the acronym MAGA, right? Make America Great Again. And I'm going to come up with the MERGA acronym, which is Make Religion Great Again.
That's awesome.
So that's what I'm talking about here. Let's make religion great again. Let's talk about a theology which people would feel inspired by. Let's talk about a theology that is being presented to us by a culture who was never involved in mass murder, which most people don't even know. Historically speaking, a big part of people's reluctancy towards religion is this cruel and unfortunate history of religious warfare, and people killing other people in the name of religion. So that's very degrading. That's like, I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of a religion that essentially has this kind of historical context. But as in previous podcasts we were discussing, a lot of that is true to the three main religions of the West, because they are tribal by mentality. And again, I do not mean that in disrespect. I do not mean this in a condescending way. I do mean this in the basis of historical facts. The Abrahamic traditions come from tribes. And if you are from another tribe, not from my tribe, that in itself is enough reasons for me to annihilate you and your beliefs if you're not going to believe in my beliefs. So that's the source of religious wars historically, as we know. But our tradition coming from the West, it is known like philosophical theology. There has never been this religious wars. Like, you don't hear about Buddhists going on a jihadist mission against Hindus or Jains. That never happened in history of religion. So that's what I mean by Marga. Let's make religion great again. You know, let's talk about a theology which not only is cohesive, not only I feel happy and proud to discuss with others, I don't feel shameful. And as we're going to see in this text of chapter 4 that we're going to be discussing today, the beauty of a complete theology. It's so beautiful, you know, and that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Those are great points. Frangi, I really liked your point about having reminders in the home, because I kind of felt the same way this morning. There was a late night here. We have a program at the Long Beach Temple every night. And it didn't end until 2 a.m. with the discussions afterwards. And Sunday morning, I'm always moving a little slowly. So your point about reminders, whether it's a picture or a ritual, is such a good point to keep us connected. And I liked Tukram's process, kind of mapping out what it's like to go from atheism to theism, where, like you said, Tadeo, you start with a good theology and good, strong arguments for the existence of God. And then you start to have these divine experiences. And then you start to develop that personal relationship even more. Like Frangi said, you know, it's a personal deity.
Conception.
Yeah, personal conception of God. And start to walk with Krishna. And then I thought it was funny that Tukram said that, oh, and then we start to sound like crackpots talking about Krishna all the time. Correct. And then we become a touchstone for the next generation. So I just thought that was a nice mapping of how you go from, you know, 0 to walking with God.
Yeah, it's so true. I love one of the things that he mentioned. I mean, it was through probably the span of half an hour of him fleshing out concepts, but how he said, you know, it's not that life, or for example, the Gita is just like, it has some texts that are very practical, and then there's information about God, and there's two separate things. It's actually one thing. But a spiritualist becomes very expert at seeing the whole world as a conversation with God. And he didn't say it in this way, but I have heard him say this before in other classes. And other practitioners in our tradition also say this. So, you know, life and lessons become very practical. Even when we're reading about the activities of Krishna in the spiritual world, even those things that seem to be so like not from this world and so far away and so like maybe in the future, become actually so inspiring, and they change our lives here and now. So there's no room for fanaticism in a tradition that is firstly very well founded on logic and philosophy, on truth, something that makes sense, right? And then little by little we develop that love, like Soza mentioned, to know him is to love him. So the more knowledge we gain, the more attachment we start feeling towards Krishna, because we start getting to know him and his devotees and his friends and his family members, and like just everything that God is about. And so there's really no room for a fanatical blind faith to take root, because everything has an explanation. And you can't really rush it, because you can't really fake advancement. If you're doing it right, you're fully satisfied at every stage of your process, because you're finding something that really speaks to you at that level, and you're able to then help the other generation, but also you're connected to to your own upline. And I guess this brings me to a really a point that has been just coming up in my own life with people that I have relationships with. And it's something that I never like had thought about so much, but I guess it's a big deal for people. So I'll bring it up in case some of you have an issue with this as well, which is the fact that some of us have a really hard time accepting that there's always a position in which you need help from somebody that's a little bit more ahead than you are, and that you're going to be a point of support for somebody that's coming after you. So, Krishna brings this point up in these texts that we covered in Friday night's class, excuse me, of the disciplic succession, and how important actually that has always been the structure of passing teachings down since time immemorial. And so this is a bona fide way in which we as a tradition have survived, and we continue to do that. Our teachers have teachers, and their teachers have teachers, and so on and so forth. So we're, by actually connecting to this line and chain of disciplic succession, or of teaching teachers and students, that's how we get to grow and flourish in spiritual life. It doesn't mean that you're less than and you don't mean as much as another person because of that hierarchy. It just means that somebody else has already put in a little more time, has a little more experience, or even more realization than you. In our case with our teachers, the gap is much bigger. But even just within our little communities, there's some of us that have been around a little longer, have had different experiences. Therefore, we can provide support and shelter to other people that are just coming around. And then eventually that person will become that to somebody else, and so on and so forth. And so I thought this was a really important point, again, because it has come up in my own experience, personal experience. And it was brought to my attention that this is actually something that a lot of people feel uncomfortable with. The fact that when they come into a tradition, there is some hierarchy, and they don't necessarily like it. And I was thinking about this concept, and I'd like to hear from both of you, your perspectives of this concept that I would say here in the West, but I'm not sure, of how afraid we are to not be at the top and be like the ones teaching all the time, or be guru, or this phenomenon of it's me, and the spotlight has to be on me, and I don't follow anybody, and I'm independent, and I don't need help, and I have my own truth, and I will follow my own intuition, and I don't need anybody else because I can connect to God directly without any help. And so I know some of it sounds a little yeah, that resonates with me. I used to think this way. But for the most part, I haven't really had so much personal experience in that regard, where I feel more about, I guess, not disgust, but feel weird about having somebody that can help me, And so is this a phenomenon that you guys maybe have experienced, or that you see that is a problem, not a problem, but that most people feel uncomfortable with, and how much Krishna is really putting it out there, yeah, this is a chain that we should follow. Actually, I'm a part of that chain. And actually, when I'm here, I also have my teachers, and I also have people below me. And even, Krishna and Arjuna, they're contemporaries, right? But Arjuna understands that Krishna is something different, and he's willing to ask for help, even if they have a friendship relationship. So how important it is for us to get this straight, that it's actually really healthy to have and to be a part of that chain where you have people above you and below you, and that you're continuously growing, and it has nothing to do with your value as a person, but it has a lot to do with just a culture of respect and a culture of understanding that there's no way we can make it alone. Even Arjuna, that was such a wonderful personality, he needed help. And because of his magnanimity, he had Krishna as his guru, but we also, through this line, our teachers are also representing Krishna. So it's as if we had Krishna himself teaching us and giving us so much love and shelter in our own little communities and micro examples of what we see here in the Gita with our Krishna and Arjuna. Do you guys have any thoughts about this issue that, in my view, it's very prominent nowadays, and it's really becoming an obstacle in a lot of people's spiritual lives?
It's a very interesting point, Varangi. And this is part of what I like discussing with devotees, because we have this text from the Gita, we have Tukaram as a teacher, we have Prabhupada's purport, but somehow or another, there's always more that comes. It's like a bottomless pit of information and different paths and different directions that we can take the Gita and extrapolate so many different teachings out of it. And it's exactly what I like talking with devotees, because you see all these different things. Now, the particular point you bring up is quite interesting, and I do also recognize that as being actually a major problem in the West, I would say, because people do have this problem with authority and being part of an organized religion that has been established in the line of disciplic succession. I have an answer to that, or not an answer, let's say an observation. First is that in my life, I was blessed and I was fortunate to never suffer from that vice myself. Instead, I was always eager to learn from people that knew more than me and ask them questions. It was my biggest impetus to really become a Hare Krishna devotee, because I could actually ask questions and they would actually answer. And those are people that were older than me, and I loved it. So that was really, is one of the blessings that I was born with. I thank God for it. I have that nature in me. But yes, it is a big problem. A lot of people in the West don't. And in fact, they will say, I don't like religion because I don't like structured religion. That's why I'm saying we're going to make religion great again. So to me, my observation with this, Varangi, is that people that think that way, they're not very sincere. And unfortunately, I think they need more suffering, because it is only through suffering that they're going to become sincere about why are they suffering. And because like Tukaram, our teacher, says oftentimes, suffering is very therapeutic. If we're living life in Southern California, Hawaii, and so on, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, it's beautiful. It's sunny outside. We have relatively okay lifestyles in terms of not struggling with money and shelter and so on. And we are not really interested in God. So it's a very easy excuse to make. I don't like structured, I don't like organized religion. I don't like authority. They just disregard that, right? So my observation is that people that think that way, they're not very sincere. They're not very sincere about eliminating their sufferings, or they're not very sincere about attaining their highest potential. Because if they were, there would be no reasons why they wouldn't take religion as serious as a Harvard law student. And this is why I absolutely adore Prabhupada's description of our movement, one of the descriptions of our movements, as the science of self-realization. When we are doing science, the variables must be in a controlled environment. How are you going to learn all that on your own? How you learn what the variables are? How you learn how to control the variables? You can't. You need somebody who has had prior knowledge into this. How are you going to become a brain surgeon if you never take lessons from another brain surgeon? How are you going to perform open heart surgery if you never see somebody else, somebody who knows more than you, somebody who can explain to you the science of heart transplant works? How are you going to learn that on your own? How you expect to not have to read any books or put any amount of sincere, sober, and dedicated hours into learning the science of brain surgery? It would be ridiculous. Somebody that has that expectations, they're not really serious. They're just saying, oh, I want to be a brain surgeon, but I am not going to go to medical school because I don't like organized educational institutions.
I don't want somebody telling me what to do.
I don't want my professor from Harvard teaching me how to operate on somebody's brain. Somebody who would think that way, we would feel pity on that individual and hope that he's all right. Maybe call 911 because the person is really thinking they're going to perform brain surgery on somebody else, but they're going to
without training.
And they're not going to accept any instructions of anybody who knows more than them. This person should be in jail or in a mental institution. And they're not very serious about their endeavors. They're just saying that. Because if they were, they're going to engage themselves in a scientific way, which necessitates somebody who's done it before, that knows more than you, and a particular set of books that can teach you the documented knowledge on how to perform, how to study, how to gain knowledge about these things. So we are engaged in the science of self-realization, which necessitates such a structure and such teachers. And I can even, I don't know if it's directly related, but I just heard myself speaking this and I want to bring it up because I think it's a very sweet contradiction. There is this Eastern teacher, his name is Krishna. He's quite popular. I think a lot of people know of him in the East and in the West.
I've read one of his books, actually.
Correct. The biggest contradiction in all of his teachings is that his main teaching is that we should reject teachings and teachers because we all have a direct connection with God, and we should strive to explore that, but that we don't need teachers or structured teachings. However, the idea that we don't need any teachings is itself a teaching. And
he's teaching that to somebody else.
That teaching, that you don't need any teaching. So it's like an extraordinary contradiction which most people can pick on it. And that we don't need a structure in order to learn this teaching. But he was a speaker in a public arranged event that had a tremendous amount of infrastructure behind it and structure. So he was using of a structure to teach the teachings that you should reject teachings and structures. How do you make sense out of that? Right? Is a tremendous contradiction.
It's crazy how important it is to develop critical thinking. It's like if we
one of our highest faculties.
Yeah, if we all put so much effort into that.
Articulated critical thinking, like intelligence to discriminate between tribal religion versus philosophical religion, and understand fanaticism versus true love. Critical thinking and articulated speech is like one of the highest human faculties we have. We should develop that.
And it'll allow us to recognize when somebody is actually speaking something that has value.
Yes.
And it will help us, I don't know, be protected from people that are speaking nonsense that can actually really like kill our spiritual lives.
Yes.
So by developing critical thinking, and even if you don't have that faculty, hanging out with people that apparently look like they are logical, and then putting what they're saying, like really actually thinking about it. Does that make sense? Do they practice what they preach? Does this yield any results? Let me step into that lab. Does that make sense? If you realize that somebody is actually speaking coherently, logically, has what the philosophy that they're trying to communicate or share actually makes sense, you've won the lottery. Stick around. Don't be foolish. Don't think you know it all. Don't get scared. Like, it's all good. Because you have critical thinking, you're protected. When something comes up that doesn't make sense and it makes you feel weird and you need to ask some questions, at least you could be peaceful about the fact that you have the faculty and you can bring it up to those, you could say, leaders or somebody, those people above you. And if you feel satisfied by their information or the answer to your questions, then you can continue your process. But it's actually really, I think that word really nails it. It's foolish to come in, try it out. You have seen results in your life, but then you think that only because of that structure, that they don't have any value. simply because you don't like the structure, but not because the philosophy doesn't make sense, not because you haven't seen results in your life, not because you know, but simply because, oh, I don't want somebody above me, or I don't want somebody below me, you know?
Yeah,
And so it's like critical thinking really saves us.
it's super foolish, because then again, what is the point of going to university? Well, you're only going to find teachers and structure there. What is the point in belonging to a country? Like, you have a government. Your government is the biggest structure there is. Your presidents, your senators, your House of Representatives, they are all making decisions on your behalf. They represent a huge structure under which you are a small part, and they are the ones that are ruling. So it's foolish to approach religion in that way, because every other aspects of our lives are guided by structure and teachers. And we fall under that without even realizing. We have the Constitution of the United States is the scripture of this country, and everybody has to follow that book, whether you like it or not. And the structure of the governments and the teachers are the presidents and senators and congressmen and women and so on. So everything of any value, anything that actually provides value to society, has structure and teachers. So why would we believe that religion should be any different? So to me, it is a lack of sincerity. You're not really trying to know and love God. You're trying to tap into supernatural powers that will allow you to fulfill your material desires in an easier and more satisfying way. You want more money, you want a bigger house, you want another car, you want another spouse, and that's what you think religion will give you.
Right. Or
Not
you
that,
want a family because you don't really have a nice family situation at home, or you want just some people to hang out with, which is not wrong, but it is a materialistic
it is
desire. And
like
you
not
want a trend, like you
exactly.
want to, like, oh, I have a guru, or like
Yeah.
I am a Hindu, as opposed to like really just going in for that goal of
Correct. And
knowing truth.
and earlier I said such people would need more suffering. And I don't mean that from a calloused, cold-hearted way. I do believe the suffering is therapeutic. There's a huge, tremendous value in suffering. It is only when you suffer that you are willing to make an adjustment into your lifestyle. Because if everything's just going smooth and you're living your dream every day and everything's fine, there is no real reason for you to adjust or adapt and therefore become better. There's no real reasons for you to do that. Everything is already fine. But, you know, we die at the end. To me, that's the reminder I carry around. When I'm feeling a little low or feeling a little lazy and I look around for reminders around my house, the reminder to me is death. You know, we die. So it's not all great. So we can think that I want to put an end to that. If I'm an eternal being, why should I die? If I'm an eternal being, why should I love why should I lose the ones I love? And it is only through either contemplation in these reminders or suffering that we're going to become sincere and say, no, I want to put an end to this. If God does exist, my greatest gain is to love him. And my greatest loss is to ignore him. Like, that's just so logical. If God is true, if everything we're saying is true, a person's greatest gain would be to know him and love him. And a person's greatest loss would be to ignore him and suffer unnecessarily. So why not take it seriously? Why not submit yourself to a scientific process which absolutely requires teachers and structure? You know, so that's my comment to that, Veronica.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think,
What about you?
well, based on lectures that I've heard from the Swamis, the teachers, Radha Swami, Tukaram Prabhu, one of the biggest points they highlight is humility, where if you do not have enough humility, you're not going to be receptive, period. So from the get-go, you're going to be hobbled in your growth, your knowledge and advancement. And so I think that's a big stickler. Like that's one of the primary things that I've been working on and will be working on for the rest of my life is humility. Because yeah, I love the philosophy, and it's only through Krishna's grace that I'm going to be able to really receive and understand a lot of these concepts that teachers are generously sharing with us. So that's one point. And then, yes, I agree that suffering is therapeutic and cathartic. And once again, I'm going to put my sister on blast. I feel that I can't imagine another human being who has gone through as much suffering as she has, from growing up in the orphanage, just abuse from day one, and then coming to the United States and having abuse from friends, classmates, from husbands, and then now her children. It's constant. And I understand karma, I understand everything on paper. And so the more suffering that she has had, I have noticed the more anger and resentment she has towards the God that we grew up with, and the God that was pushed in her face as the answer to all of her suffering growing up. And so with her, it's been this process of kind of deprogramming the really deep-seated feelings and identities that she established from that disastrous concept of divinity that we grew up with. And so I think there's hope for her to be open to this philosophy. But I mean, suffering in and of itself is not necessarily going to move someone in the right direction unless they have a teacher, unless they have someone who's has good association. So I think a lot of people who reject perhaps this philosophy, this community, more of their personal stuff is going on, where they're seeking connection with people, and maybe they're not connecting the way they like with people in the community, and then they're just going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, like, you know, this is the reason I'm going to use, I don't like the guru format or whatnot. And when really what they're suffering from is they're not connecting the way they want to, and they're not feeling loved and supported. And that's not something that I feel is fair to blame on our philosophy and the structure that we have. So it's such a complex situation.
Yeah, I think you bring up such good points. And I think the latter one is, you know, how important it is for us to also work on our material hangups. It's not just a matter of, okay, learning the philosophy and like learning a logical and a healthy conception of divinity. And it's also very important, and this is brought up so much by our teachers. You have to work on yourself. Like, you have to work on developing humility, developing a good character, integrity, respect, humility, transparency, honesty, because all those things will help you in your spiritual life. You know, and the more that we make progress in our spiritual life, the easier it'll be for us to face these problems, or these personal hangups, or whatever you want to call them. And I was thinking about this concept of, why do people, okay, when you brought it up, Soza, of like, some people are just comfortable, but are they really? Like, material life, I mean, as good as you may have it, it could just never be so smooth. There's always something. There's always something, you know, either your mind or somebody else or the earth, you know, like things that are beyond your control. And so you're always suffering. So what is it that makes people believe or feel, I'm good, I don't need anything else? It's really illusion. It's not that they're actually good. It's not that nobody's suffering. It's not that they feel happy where they're at. It's just, and this is what I have seen from people that have come and go from this tradition, is they come in thinking, oh, spirituality is going to be like just the earrings I'm going to wear today, you know, like an accessory. Spirituality is an accessory that I can use for my own benefit. But what happens is that spirituality, when done right, that just means it's going to like shine the spotlight on all the things that we need to clean up. And this is often brought up in our texts, you know, it's cleaning up the mirror of our heart, the dust of our heart. And that's what bhakti does, bhakti yoga. Every time we engage in this practice of spirituality, we're cleaning the dust, which is materialism accumulated life after life in our heart. And so what a spiritual tradition does, a healthy one anyway, is really point the finger or shine the spotlight on those things that we need to work on. And what happens is, this is just my analysis, I could be wrong, is that people are expecting spirituality to be something super easy and simply like, oh, I could just turn it on and turn it off whenever I want to, and then go on with my life and I don't have to do anything else. But the reality is, when those things are brought up and they come up either by your relationships, by your own study, by your own progress, you're just not, I think, strong enough and ready, sincere, to be like, okay, I have my work cut out. Like, I need to get to work. I need to start the cleaning process. Like, I'm all in, I'm good. I have a group of people that love me and support me. Everybody else is doing the same. It's not like you're the only one doing the hard work. Everybody's working on themselves as well. And so I really think it boils down to that, is the fact that we have a misconception of what spirituality should be like. It should be easy, and it should be exactly what God should fit into my plan, not me fit into God's plan. And so when we see the stuff that we need to work on, we blame other people, and we blame maybe even the philosophy, or we start looking for excuses for why it's not for me. And so what happens is that you go fall back into that illusion of thinking, oh, I'm better off like this. But the reality is that you're just more comfortable turning a blind eye to your reality, that you're actually suffering, that you do have things to work on, that other people actually do care about you. But that requires a lot more honesty, integrity, transparency, strength, humility, and that's a hard pill to swallow. And it's really sad to see how many of us are more comfortable being in illusion and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's really so sad, because we come across this jewel, this diamond, but then we give it up for broken glass, like it's very commonly described in our scripture. Materialism is just broken glass, but it shines a lot because there's a lot of it. So when we find a diamond, very few times can we realize that it's a diamond and really stick to it. But yeah, I think the three of us can vouch for really sticking to this process, even when things get hard, because they will. That's part of growth. Things will get hard, but it will never be as hard as you being in materialism and being in illusion about it. There's just nothing worse than that. I don't know. Would you agree with this analysis?
Yeah, I do. And absolutely, Varangi, I do. And Kim, I just want to make a comment to what you said as well. Absolutely, humility is a big component of what we're discussing here. Because if you don't have humility, you're not going to accept a pre-existing structure. You're not going to accept a teacher. You're going to think, I know it all, and I don't need anybody. I don't need any structure, right? So humility is absolutely a huge component of this as well, as we're discussing this point that Varangi introduced. And in terms of suffering also, you made a point to it, which I think I brought up suffering, right? And I think you made a point that made it more complete. I want to acknowledge that also. Suffering by itself is not going to move anybody. Suffering by itself can just lead into more suffering and depression and so on. But related to this topic of humility, I think that is the biggest benefit of suffering. It leads you to humility, because it is only after you have suffered enough that you're going to start to contemplate, maybe I don't know it all. Maybe everything that I have tried is just not working out. And that humility is going to be forced upon you, where you do become open to accept the help and the grace and the mercy and the love of your community and your peers. So I do think that the therapeutic part of suffering, there could be more, but I think that a big component of that suffering is the genesis of humility in one's consciousness, because then you become humble. Hey, I've suffered enough. Like, I'm not as powerful, as great as I thought it was, because if I was, I wouldn't be suffering this much. Mm-hmm. Then you open yourself up for higher power, for higher help, by developing the humility.
So
I thought what we could do in this episode today is also highlight some of the texts that we went over in class and how that paints the picture of this theology that we are so eagerly discussing here, that which I was discussing earlier, right? That makes us so proud of talking about our religion. So I want to bring up two texts that we covered yesterday that starts to tell us about the nature of God and how beautiful and complete and cohesive and non-sectarian our philosophy is. One is starting to here, chapter 4, text 7. Krishna says, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious principles, a practice, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Okay, so let's unpack this text a little bit. To us, in our theology, in our philosophy, God must be a triple O God. The three O's are omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence, which is to say he's all powerful, he's all good, and he's all knowledgeable. So that's the basis, a big part of the basis of our theology. And these texts of the Gita, they are emphasizing this theology. But like you said, Varangi, we must be an expert at it in order to identify, in order to be able to distinguish the true teachings that we get, right? And somebody, and you'll be our teacher that points that out to us. And Tukaram has that ability, right? So in this verse here is a testimonial to God's omnibenevolence, how he is all good. Because he says that whenever there is a decline in religious practice and a predominant rise of irreligion, let's think about what the word would look like. Predominance, right? Predominant descendants on religious practice, which kind of gives me hope, because it seems like nowadays things are very chaotic with our current leaders, with the diseases and protests and so on. But yeah, Krishna is not here personally, so it's not as bad as it has gotten before in the past. But let's imagine that it gets even worse, right? Worldwide chaos, worldwide irreligion. And religion practically extends from people's consciousness, and very evil-minded people predominantly ruling the world. Let's imagine what the world would be like if that was the world we lived in. You know, there are a lot of good people around today still, even though some of the leaders are bad. There are a lot of good people that makes Earth right now not such a bad place for us to live. But let's imagine that it got much, much worse. What would be our hope? Who could do what if all of our leaders became extremely greedy and lusty and hateful and just wanting to nuke each other and destroy each other's economy, cyber attacks, etc.? What would the world be like? What would be our hope? Who would come to our rescue? Who would be our hero? Well, this is a testimonial to Krishna's omnibenevolence, how much he loves us. He says, hey, you know what? At that time, when that happens, then I will come. Like I will come, and then there's the next verse. To deliver the pious, so this is text 4, chapter 4, text 8, which is the very next verse. Krishna then says, to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So Krishna is now saying, hey, in a matter of time, people's greed, lust, and hate is going to get the best out of them. And this is going to be the major energy that rules the world: lust, greed, hate, anger, etc. And then Krishna says, at that time, I will come and I will deliver all the pious people and I will annihilate all the miscreants, because he's going to take care of us and he's going to make sure to reestablish religious principles in the world. Well, that's a great friend. That's a person who's going to come to our rescue. That's a person who truly, deeply cares about us. He didn't create the universe or the planet and put us here and said, all right, now you guys go on and fulfill all your material desires. Good luck with that. And turn his back on us. He did not do that. He is the person who is observing us making mistakes, hoping that we're going to use the free will that he gave us to turn towards him. But if we don't, and we continue to act selfishly, with our acts being driven mainly by anger, lust, and hate and greed, and when that happens, because we have a tendency to misuse our free will, and therefore that's going to happen. When that happens, he still cares. He still loves us. He's still recognizing, hey, you guys didn't do it right again, but here I come again and again and again. He says millennium after millennium, which implies that he's been doing this since time immemorial. Whenever we can get it right, he comes here and gets it right for us. That is a great friend. That's a friend that I want to have. That's a friend who is not going to care about me making so many mistakes and making the wrong choices, like causing suffering to others unnecessarily. He's still going to come and set things right and give me another chance. When he says to annihilate the miscreants, is not where that ends. We have the understanding that the soul is eternal and the soul never dies. So to annihilate the miscreants means to put an end to your confused state of consciousness. And then like start over, go take another body someplace else, perhaps some suffering in a hellish condition, and then start over, start again. You get another chance, you get another start. Well, that's a loving God. That's a God who cares. So I thought that that's a big testimonial to Krishna's omnibenevolence, which is somewhat hidden here in the text of Gita.
Do either of you know why Krishna chose this period of time to incarnate?
It's the fourth yuga.
Oh, so for Kali,
right?
Kali.
No, it's not Kali, sorry. It's at the end of Dwapara Yuga, which I believe is the second one, right? Is it? That's a good question, Kim. I don't remember. I don't know. Do you know the sequence of the four yugas?
Satya Yuga is the first. Dwapara Yuga is the one before our current, and Kali is our current.
No, there's another one.
There's
Treta Yuga. Treta Yuga.
Treta. Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali.
Okay, here in the purport to text 7, Prabhupada is talking about this. He says, although the Lord appears on schedule, namely at the end of the Dwapara Yuga of the 28th millennium of the 7th Manu, in one day of Brahma, he has no obligation to adhere to such rules and regulations because he is completely free to act in many ways at his will. So that's exactly the answer to your question.
That's two in one, Varangi. That's two in one. It is exactly the answer to Kim's question. And it is also another testimonial to how much he loves us. Like Prabhupada is saying, hey, he doesn't have to. He's not bound by this schedule. But he does so because he truly loves us. He doesn't have to. He do it out of his mercy. He do it because he really cares about us, because he's our greatest friend.
Right. And I just wanted to point this out, like, because this is a little mystical. I'm like, oh my gosh, how cool is that? Even, like every question, it's answered in these texts. Like he's talking about Manu and Brahma and Dwapara Yuga and the 28th millennium of the 7th. Like all this is explained in the Vedas. Like what that means, what are the Manus, and how is, the material existence divided up, and what are these 4 yugas or eras, and what does each one represent, and when does Krishna come? And so there's like all these facts about the actual, I guess, physical aspect of material existence. And then there's also the inner or hidden reasons, right, that our teachers give us a perspective into, and we get that through the purports, and that's all throughout all our texts. So I thought that was pretty cool how you had that question, and for some reason I had just remembered that it was in one of the purports, and I picked the purport that you just went the verse that you just went through. So
yeah, thank you, Varangi. It was right there too.
Always there.
Yeah, the purport was right there.
Prabhupada. It's all Prabhupada. He gave us everything we needed and way more.
That's right. Okay, one other one. text 10, Krishna says, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me. And thus, they all attained transcendental love for me. Like, this is another such powerful theological point that has been thrown around by many, many religions, many, many spiritual paths. And here, Krishna, simply by having a conversation with Arjuna, is establishing this very sophisticated theological principles here. The principle here is what we hear sometimes, that to know him is to love him, right? So Krishna is saying, hey, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, and being fully absorbed in me, taking refuge in me. So, and many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me. So if I don't have any devices of attachment, fear, and anger, and I am fully absorbed in God, so I'm thinking about him all the time, I will therefore develop knowledge of him. Like, why does he come? Like your question, Kim, like, why does he come? What he already mentioned, right? To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants. We're getting a window into God's consciousness, into Krishna consciousness. Why does he do that? Because he loves us and he cares about us, and he knows that we're going to misuse our free will. Just like I know that if allowed, my children are going to start running around and misusing the free will that I gave them. They're going to cross the street without looking for cars, and they're going to start misbehaving. That's why I don't give them ultimate free will, because they're going to misuse it. So it's our nature. So similarly, we are these children who are going to misuse our free will. And God knows we're going to do that, but then he comes to help us. And this is just one. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of windows into who God is as a person, how he acts with us. But then this point, this theological point, that as we start purifying our knowledge and getting rid of fear, anger, etc., and attachments, and we start knowing him, the result of that will be that we will fall in love with him, because he is all good and all merciful and all powerful. And that's essentially another reason why he comes, to show us all of his pastimes, to show us how he interacts with the devotees that purely love him as well. And then we are left with these memories in our minds, which causes us to constantly be thinking of him and knowing who he is and how he acts. And simply by knowing him, we will love him. So this is such a huge theological point as well, that comes up in many, many religions. And here Krishna is establishing this deep point in a simple conversation with Arjuna.
Yeah, I thought verse 10 was so beautiful. I really loved just reading it last night and dwelling on it. And I have a question for both of you. We're kind of running late, but I don't really want to stop our discussion. A small fear that I have is, how will I know in the next life that it won't take me half my life to remember Krishna again? And kind of to your point earlier, Varangi, about we want religion or spirituality to fit into our life and do something for us. And I was starting to go down that path of, I really need to do as much as I can in this life to make sure, give me as good of a chance as possible to be in Krishna consciousness in the next life. And then Tukram's class last night mentioned how through Krishna's grace, he sends us mentors and teachers and friends. And then that kind of mostly alleviated a lot of my fears. So I think these texts address that fear of mine. And I was wondering if there was anything else that either of you can add as to why our tradition feels so strongly that you do kind of pick up in the next life where you left off.
Well, I'd like to clarify that what I was referring to in my comment was more of a materialistic, trying to fit spirituality into your materialistic lifestyle. Your fear, not even fear, I would say, like your determination and aspiration is spiritual. And it's actually something that that we should all be feeling. It's something that I want to feel. What can I do today to make sure that I'm guaranteed a KC spot in my next body? Hopefully we'll not have to take any more material bodies, but if it's Krishna's desire for us to take birth again here to continue in his mission, then the devotee is always willing to do whatever it takes to please Guru and Krishna, right? But your fear, or your, yeah, I would call it more of like an aspiration and goal. It's spiritual. Like, what can I do to stay in Krishna consciousness in this lifetime? And I think that goal will keep you in Krishna consciousness in this lifetime. And because you're focused on that and determined on that, that will determine that in your next life, you continue in that same path, whether here or in another universe or back at home with Krishna, wherever he sends us, right? So that's, I just wanted to clarify, there is a big difference between, you know, we hear it so much, like, greed is not bad. Greed is bad when you materialize it. But to have spiritual greed, that's like what we're being trained for. And it's like, what does that look like? Well, let's be greedy with service. When something comes up and somebody needs help, it's like, yeah, I want to do that service. Sign me up. Like, so the point is to fit as much Krishna into our life as possible. We have 24 hours a day. And for a lot of us, Krishna takes up a little bit of those 24 hours. So the point is to increment Krishna's presence in our daily lives as much as possible. Of course, not to the point where you burn out and then you do the boomerang effect, right? You burn out so hard that you just bloop and go back into the material pool. So not like that, but gradually you want to include Krishna more and more because you're getting to know him and you're inspired, and you, this beautiful person that is actually capable of fulfilling all your desires and all your aspirations and all your wildest dreams has now become a part of your life. So you want more and more, just like when you have a best friend. It's like you meet somebody and like, oh, they're cool, you know? Then you want to like hang out more. So you text them more, you hang out more, you talk on the phone more. All of a sudden you're hanging out every day. And then like, so you conspire, you think of ways in which you can spend even more and more time, right? And then eventually, just in like our material relationships, we want to have loyalty. We want to have friends that will never reject us, that can see the worst in us and will never walk away, that can see the worst in us and point it out and be like, hey, this isn't cool. Like, you need to work on this. Like the same thing that we expect in our material relationships, we can have that with Krishna. And it actually becomes real from what I hear from my teachers. Krishna becomes actually just a person in their lives. And so I just wanted to clarify the difference between what I was referring to earlier and what I see and or what I hear from your question. And actually how that's the 10th, that was the 10th text. I think a huge point, and also in the purport, is the fact that Prabhupada is pointing to how when you're so materialistic, when we're so materialistic, it's so hard for us to understand Krishna as a person. We actually don't want to understand him as a person because that requires you to step up. That requires you for you to stop ignoring him and to actually treat him as a person, just like you would like to be treated. But when we're so attached to materialism, it's so much easier to keep Krishna or God as an abstract topic, as something that it's an energy. It's like this cool thing that it like gives me warmth, and that's it. Or the universe, you know, like you keep God in like a box of impersonalism, and as an energy, as a thought, as a something nice but abstract, without physical and personality traits or anything like that, because that would require you to have to be like engage in a more intimate way, right? And so anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for clarifying that point. Yeah, you were talking about materialism. So
I have a comment on that. Varangi, I think you answered expertly. Thank you for that. And however, Kim, there is a unstated premise in your question, which I like to address and reject, completely attack, which is that you are going to have a next lifetime anyways, because your question, the unstated premise is that I'm coming back here to this material world. And how do I pick up where I left? So that's the unstated premise. I reject that premise on Prabhupada's behalf. I heard a lecture, video lecture by Prabhupada, where his disciples were asking him this specific question, where in some other Vedic literature, it is said that, or some other Sampadraya, which is to say another lineage of disciplic succession, they were discussing how it takes a soul 7 lifetimes to become purified and go back to the spiritual world. And they were asking Prabhupada what was his take on that. Like, it would take us 7 lifetimes. And essentially your question, how about lifetime number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? How do I make sure that I'm always on track? Well, Prabhupada rejected that. He said, not 7, but this lifetime. Prabhupada's movement is to make sure that we go back to Godhead, to the spiritual world, along with Krishna at the end of this lifetime. That comes in the scientific aspect of what I was saying. If we follow Prabhupada's process in a scientific way, it does work that we leave this body in this lifetime and we go back to Godhead at the end of this life. Now, I'm going to problematize my own point here. Earlier, we were talking about humility. And a lot of devotees that I know personally have had this conversation many times, won't really hear this point that I just made. They will hear this point that Prabhupada made, but they have become so humble. And humility is such a predominant aspect of their consciousness that they don't believe that they can do it, right? They believe that, oh, I'm so fallen and I'm so tiny. The material manifestation is so great. And I will need so many lifetimes of purification before I can actually make back to Godhead. It's due to their humility. They see themselves as who they are, as who we are. We all are very tiny spark of spirit. And the material manifestation is humongous. How can we get out of here? How can we expect that at the end of this lifetime, I'm going to make it back to Godhead? I've heard like, that's an arrogant mentality. That's like you thinking you're the doer, that you can do it, and so on. So that's me problematizing my own point, to which I then contemplated and asked questions for my Tukaram even included, and then had a further realization, is that yes, it is true. I am tiny, I am small, and I cannot overcome material life on my own and make it back to Godhead at the end of this lifetime. But Krishna's mercy is more powerful than I am degraded, than I am falling. So I'm falling to an extent, but Krishna's mercy is much, much higher than my wickedness. And with Krishna's mercy, I am able to go back to Godhead. All I have to do is to fully surrender to my teacher and his teachings and his instructions in a scientific way. Scientific approach is to say, to really adhere to all the rules and regulations. And if we do that, we will go back to Godhead at the end of this lifetime, and there won't be another lifetime. Why should there be another lifetime? We should follow Prabhupada's instructions precisely, sincerely, and go back to Godhead at the end of this lifetime. Now, to finish it off, I'll go one step further, which is to say that the end of Prabhupada's answer to this point was not even at the end of this lifetime. Prabhupada said 1 minute. And you know, Prabhupada had this way of saying something so powerfully, so simple, and yet so powerful. And he looked at this devotee and he said, 1 minute. It will take you 1 minute to go back to Godhead, which is to say, you don't even have to die to be back in the spiritual world. You can attain Krishna consciousness and have a fully transcendental experience in this planet without even having to die, where all you see is Krishna and the deities is Krishna, and you have never left the spiritual world. You have always been there, and this whole thing is illusion, and we have never left. So you don't even need another lifetime. At the end of this lifetime, we can go back to Godhead, and we don't even need to die. You can be back with Krishna even now. My Guru Maharaj, Devamrita Swami, says that the biggest mystery about bhakti is not seeing Krishna, is not being face to face with Krishna. That the biggest mystery of bhakti is the pursuit of Krishna. The pursuit of Krishna is higher than being with Krishna. Devamrita Maharaj has an entire lecture on this point, and it is true. Because once you see Krishna, there is Krishna. But if you are longing to see Krishna, if you are on your path to see Krishna, the anticipation of seeing Krishna, the triumph, like the journey, like a lot, we say this in material consciousness, right? We say that what's worth is the journey. Like I had that kind of experience, materially speaking. Like I've won basketball championships in the past. Well, guess what? Winning the championship is one day. Like that was that last game of the season. If we won that game, we've won the championship. If we lost the game, we've lost the championship. You played that one game, you last for 40 minutes, and the game is done, and you're champion. That's it. Then you go home, you have dinner, and you go to sleep because the day ends and it's nighttime. It's over. So really, it's the journey, the pursuits, the aspect, like the whole season that led up to that. That led up to you winning the championship or seeing Krishna. So you can start that sincere search for Krishna even now, and in that way, completely be completely transcendental. The kingdom of God is at hand now. That was Jesus Christ's way of saying it. We don't even have to die to be there. We can be in the spiritual world right now. So just wanted to say that.
Perfect.
Thank you. That, yeah, both answers really helped a lot. So, yeah. Well, we are definitely at the end of the episode. Thank you both. Like I said, I loved the class. I think we all did. And so if anyone wants to relive the class from Friday of July 17th, the details, the links are in the details of every episode to go see Tukram Prabhu's lecture. And you can join every Friday evening live as well. And those links are in the details as well. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
We'll see you next week. Haribol.